So there you are, ready to create your multi-sex species for your fancy out there world. And yet, something about it doesn't feel grounded in this pentagonal sexual creation of synquilines that you have manifested into existence. Something about this setup is lacking. The problem with creating multi-sex species is that most creators don't ground them in the critical aspect required to make such a configuration work. What does it mean for their reproduction, and why would it have evolved this way? To ground your multi-sexual species, whether in fantasy or sci-fi, you have to think about how their configuration contributes to reproduction and survival. And there are three primary models we can apply when designing species that depart from the standard two-sex system. And we will look at all three of those models in today's video. Welcome to another episode of Just-in-Time World Building with your host, Marie Mullaney. Our first model is a monosexual species that reproduces through cloning, obligate parthenogenesis, or genetic manipulation. Hey, it's different from two, it's only one. We actually see this mechanism play out on Earth. A famous example is the desert grassland whiptail lizard, or Acipedocilius uniparens, often nicknamed the lesbian lizard, which is a great name for a band 10-10 no notes. There are no males in the species. They are entirely female and reproduce through parthenogenesis. However, they still engage in pseudocopulatory mating behaviors, which is a polite way of saying they hump each other. This physical stimulation triggers hormonal surges, which causes ovulation, so the unfertilized eggs can duplicate their chromosomes and develop. If you're designing a monosexual cloning species, your biggest problem is genetic diversity. Sexual reproduction exists primarily to shuffle genetic material and purge harmful mutations. Pure cloning risks genetic stagnation, leaving a population vulnerable to diseases and other poor evolutionary outcomes. To solve this in world building, your species could use horizontal gene transfer, absorbing and integrating external genetic code into their genome before reproducing. While unicellular organisms do this constantly on Earth, a macro species capable of absorbing genetic material from their environment or other individuals would create a pretty awesome societal dynamic, where you might engage in genetic trade as a form of economic activity. And wouldn't that be fun? You might even have genetic fashions as new DNA hotspots are discovered that give you new genetic traits. If you then include something like the cephalopods, octopuses and squids, ability to edit their messenger RNA, you could create a species that can not only change their own DNA, but also change their appearance even after their DNA has been transcribed. That is a lot of potential for a creature that is totally fluid in its appearance. This kind of solo reproduction also has some societal effects. In human society, much of our culture, drive, and pair bonding is shaped by our reproductive pressures. Removing sexual pressure shifts societal bonds towards community, platonic friendships, and shared goals, effectively creating an asexual, aromantic cultural baseline. So, if you want a non-romantic society that can dictate their own reproduction, go for a single-sex species that uses cloning. Our second model uses mating types based on how many fungi, algae, and slime molds reproduce. People will sometimes say that fungi have thousands of sexes, but biologically speaking, that isn't accurate. In standard biology, sex is defined by anisogamy, a difference in gamete size. In our world, that comes down to females produce the large nutrient-rich gamete, the egg, and males produce the small mobile gamete, the sperm. Fungi and molds are typically isogamous. Every individual produces identical same-sized gametes. In that sense, they are monosexual. However, to prevent self-fertilization and inbreeding, they use genetic compatibility loci called mating types. For example, the split gill mushroom uses 2 genetic loci with hundreds of alleles, resulting in over 23,000 distinct mating types. Meanwhile, the slime mold uses 3 loci to yield 720 mating types. An individual gamete can only fuse with a gamete carrying a different but compatible genetic mating type. But why did this evolve that way? Well, it's to maximize mating opportunities while preventing inbreeding. For stationary organisms, having thousands of mating types means almost every encounter with an unrelated member of their species yields a compatibility match, but still it stops inbreeding and self-impregnation. Remember, these dudes release their spores into the air, and then the gametes got to find their own partners. So if 2 spores from the same parent could mate, the chances of harmful mutations go way up. In world building, a species with thousands of mating types wouldn't have binary sexual dimorphism. Everyone would look similar physically, eliminating traditional binary gender roles. However, social structures might form around compatible lineage networks or regional compatibility groups, creating cultural roles based on these mating types, but entirely separate from physical sex. Just before we get to talk about true polysexuality, give me one moment to tell you about Worldbuilding Blueprints. This is the comprehensive book that I wrote on the craft of world building, which you can pick up on my website right now. There is a whole section of the book dealing with cultures, including kinship, with kinship diagrams and walking you through how to create non-human and yet sapient species and their kinship and family structures. And because you're watching this episode, I'll throw in a special discount. If you use the code MULTI, all in caps, the first 100 people get a massive 40% off the PDF edition. And that comes in full color. All right, back to the show. Our third model is genuine multi-sex systems requiring 3 or more distinct gametes to form a single viable offspring. While Earth doesn't have a true 3-gamete or multi-gamete animal, we do have some interesting parallel systems in social insects like ants. Certain harvester ants, such as the Pogonomerics, use what is called dependent lineage systems. A queen must mate from males from her own genetic lineage to produce new queens, but she must also mate with males from a separate genetic lineage to produce sterile worker ants. The colony cannot survive without genetic input from both lineages. Heck, there's one type of ant, the Mesor ibericu, that has domesticated the males of another species to use as a separate lineage. And the species they domesticated split off from the Mesor ibericu line 5 million years ago. So it's not like they were recently related or anything. This system of dependent lineage systems sets the stage for how we can build a true multi-sex species. Basically, each sex must have a role to play, same as each lineage has a role to play in the ant reproduction. So we have to expand on gamete roles beyond the standard 2. For example, gamete A could still be the primary or egg, which supplies cystoplasm, organelles, and core cellular machinery. Gamete B might supply nuclear genetic material, and gamete C could supply mitochondrial DNA, epigenetic triggers, or protective metabolic reserve, or some kind of magic DNA. In this setup, successful reproduction would require a triadic union of some kind. And you can expand that for more if you want, but in order to feel real, each sex should contribute in some fashion to the genetic material required for reproduction. Of course, this kind of biological change would have vast impacts on your social structures. Finding two or more compatible partners to complete a reproductive cycle would completely redefine family structures, marriage contracts, and social units in your world. If I were creating a polygametic creature, I'd probably spend most of my time thinking of how the new family structures would develop. Heck, you might even end up with a roaming family member who isn't actually part of a pairing unless it's mating time, and the other two actually form the family or something like that. There is a lot of potential for some very weird cultural structures in this kind of world building. Let me know what cultural structures you thought of in the comments down below. And now, while the wonderful members of the channel scroll by, the guys who make it possible for me to produce these videos, let me tell you about a few other thoughts I had while researching this topic. Nature offers other, very flexible sexual strategies worth borrowing. The first is sequential hermaphroditism, which comes in two flavors. The blue-headed wrasse uses protogeny, where it transitions from female to male based on population density. So if there's too many males, some of the wrasses become female, and vice versa. And they can do this multiple times in their lifetime. The second flavor is protandry, which is used by the clownfish. Clownfish are all born male. A group consists of several juveniles, one breeding male, and one dominant female. If the female dies, the breeding male transitions into a female, and the dominant juvenile matures into the new breeding male. And yes, this means that if Finding Nemo was scientifically accurate, Nemo's dad would have become his mom, and as for Nemo, well, it would have been a game the whole family can play, but definitely not a family movie. Moving swiftly on, Ursula K. Le Guin explored temporary fluid sexual states in The Left Hand of Darkness, where individuals were ambisexual for most of their cycle and adopt male or female characteristics only during their reproductive phase, or chemer. That book remains one of the best explorations of sexuality in fiction that I have ever read. Our second interesting mating strategy from nature is simultaneous hermaphroditism, which we see in marine flatworms, who possess both male and female reproductive organs. They engage in, I kid you not, penis fencing, where both compete to impregnate the other, since bearing and laying eggs incurs a far higher energy cost than delivering sperm. The loser gets stuck with the kids for this mating cycle, which could also make for very interesting social dynamics in a fantasy or science fiction world. And it doesn't have to be as rapey as penis fencing. It could be some kind of formalized contest or even a resource bidding competition. So whoever has the best resources gets to keep the kids, or something like that. So if you want to design a grounded multi-sex society, use mating types, isogamy, if you want cultural variation without physical dimorphism. Use polygametic systems if you want complex family structures requiring 3 or more parents. And use parthenogenesis and horizontal genetic transfer if you want a society driven by platonic community rather than sexual selection. And those are my thoughts on designing realistic multisexual species. If you made it this far, drop a fun emoji in the comments. And if you want more from me on world building biology, check out my video on biomes right now. And I will see you soon for another episode of Just in Time World Building.